My name is Amanda, and I'm a 38-year-old single mother to my wonderful 15-year-old daughter, Hannah. My younger sister Stephanie and I have always shared a very close bond, so when her wedding invitation arrived, Hannah and I were both filled with excitement. However, a wave of confusion washed over me as I realized the invitation only had my name on it, not Hannah's. When I called Stephanie to ask about the omission, her response left me stunned. She apologized, explaining that the wedding was an adults-only affair, with no one under 18 permitted. It was difficult to grasp that my own sister would intentionally exclude her niece. Stephanie and I grew up in a typical middle-class neighborhood in Denver. With a 5-year age difference, I naturally took on the role of protector and caregiver. Our parents both worked long hours, my father as an accountant and my mother as a nurse, which meant I was often responsible for picking Stephanie up from elementary school while I was still in middle school. I would help her with her homework, prepare her afternoon snacks, and listen to all the stories she wanted to share about her day at school. I can still recall an incident from when Stephanie was 9 and I was 14. Some girls at her school were bullying her because of her red hair and freckles. When I found out, I went straight to the school during recess and confronted them, telling them that if they ever bothered my sister again, they would have to deal with me. The bullying ceased immediately. Stephanie looked at me like I was her personal superhero. As we got older, our connection only grew stronger. When Stephanie had her first date at 16, I was the one who helped her choose her outfit, showed her how to apply mascara without clumps, and waited up until I knew she was home safely. I was there for every significant moment in her life, including her high school graduation, her college acceptance, and her first heartbreak. When I met my future husband, Mark, at 21, Stephanie was immediately supportive. She helped me plan my bridal shower and stood by my side as my maid of honor when I got married at 22. She held my hand through every pregnancy scare and was the first person, other than Mark, to hold Hannah after she was born. I will never forget the look of pure love on her face as she cradled her newborn niece. Life took an unexpected turn when Hannah was 5. Mark started working late, becoming distant, and constantly finding excuses to avoid family time. I eventually found out he was having an affair with a coworker. The divorce that followed was messy and painful. Mark left us with very little financial support, moving across the country with his new girlfriend and barely keeping in touch with Hannah. Those first few years as a single mom were incredibly difficult. I worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, one as an administrative assistant during the day and another waitressing on weekends. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, unsure of how I would pay the next bill or afford new shoes for Hannah's rapidly growing feet. During that challenging period, Stephanie became my rock. She would babysit Hannah on weekends so I could take on extra shifts. She helped with groceries when we were short on cash, and even paid our electric bill one winter when I had to choose between keeping the heat on and paying the rent. More importantly, she was a constant source of emotional support, always reminding me that I was strong enough to get through it. During those years, Hannah and Stephanie developed a very special bond. Stephanie was the fun aunt who took Hannah to the park, bought her ice cream, and surprised her with little gifts for no reason. When Hannah was 7, Stephanie taught her how to bake chocolate chip cookies from scratch, a Saturday tradition they maintained for years. They would spend hours in the kitchen, flour covering their faces, giggling as they experimented with different ingredients. For Hannah's 10th birthday, Stephanie took her shopping for her first grown-up dress, and they followed it with a fancy lunch where they ate with their pinkies up, pretending to be royalty. Hannah treasured the photos they took in the mall photo booth, talking about that day for months. Things started to change about 2 years ago, after Stephanie met Richard at a charity gala for her law firm. Richard came from a wealthy and influential family. He was an investment banker who lived in an exclusive neighborhood and moved in social circles that were a stark contrast to our middle-class upbringing. As Stephanie's relationship with Richard grew more serious, her visits became less frequent. The Saturday baking sessions with Hannah stopped. At first, she had excuses about being busy with work or having special plans with Richard. Eventually, the excuses disappeared and the visits simply dwindled. I began to notice subtle changes in my sister. Her clothes became more expensive, and her hair was always professionally styled. She started talking about restaurants I could never afford and vacations I had only seen in magazines. While I was happy that she seemed happy, I worried about the growing distance between us. Hannah noticed the changes too. She would often ask why Aunt Stephanie didn't come over anymore. I made excuses about adult responsibilities and busy schedules, not wanting to tarnish Hannah's image of her beloved aunt. However, I could see the hurt in my daughter's eyes when weeks would go by without a call or a text from Stephanie. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday in early June. I remember the day because Hannah had just finished her last day of 9th grade, and we were planning to celebrate with takeout and a movie marathon. The thick, cream-colored envelope with gold embossed lettering and a wax seal bearing the initials S and R immediately stood out from our usual pile of bills and flyers. Hannah's face lit up with excitement when she recognized the elegant handwriting on the envelope and asked if it was from her aunt. It looked like it, and I carefully broke the seal. The invitation inside was the most elaborate one I had ever seen. The paper felt heavy and expensive. The gold foil script announced that Stephanie Marie Johnson and Richard William Harrington III were requesting my presence as they united in matrimony. The wedding was set to take place at the Grand Wellington Hotel, one of the most prestigious venues in the city, with a reception to follow in their ballroom. Hannah peered over my shoulder, asking if we were going and if she should start thinking about what to wear. I smiled at her enthusiasm and assured her that of course we were going, because it was her aunt's big day. It wasn't until later that evening, after Hannah had gone to bed, that I noticed something was off about the invitation. At the bottom, in smaller print, it read, Amanda Johnson and guest. There was no mention of Hannah. Despite the growing distance, I held on to the hope that this was just a phase. Perhaps once Stephanie settled into her relationship with Richard, things would go back to normal. After all, our family bond was deep, and it had weathered many storms before. I called, and Stephanie answered on the third ring. Her voice seemed distracted as she asked if I had received the invitation. I confirmed that it was beautiful and mentioned how excited Hannah was about the wedding. There was a pause on the line before Stephanie explained that she and Richard had decided on an adults-only wedding, with no one under 18 allowed. I felt as though someone had punched me in the stomach. I asked what she meant, pointing out that Hannah was her niece, not some random child. Stephanie insisted that she loved her, but explained that Richard's family was very traditional and they were contributing significantly to the wedding. She mentioned their expectation of a certain level of sophistication, adding that children could be unpredictable and that they wanted everything to be perfect. I countered by saying that Hannah was 15, not 5, and that she knew how to behave at formal events. She wouldn't be running around screaming or throwing food. Stephanie sighed, explaining that it wasn't just about behavior. The venue was upscale, there would be an open bar, and Richard's family didn't believe such events were appropriate for young people. It was an adult celebration. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My sister was excluding her own niece from one of the most important days of her life because her fiancé's family didn't think it was appropriate. Desperately, I suggested that maybe Hannah could help out somehow, perhaps by handing out programs or helping guests sign the guest book so that she could still be part of the day without being a regular guest. Stephanie replied that they had already hired professional staff for all of that, and that everything had been planned down to the last detail, so they couldn't make any changes. Suddenly, I heard Richard's voice in the background, followed by Stephanie covering the phone and whispering. When she returned, her tone had changed completely. She stated that the matter wasn't up for negotiation. She and Richard had made their decision, and the invitation was for me and an adult guest, not Hannah. She hoped I could respect their wishes for their special day. Before I could respond, Richard got on the phone. He said he understood I might be disappointed, but he and Stephanie had a clear vision for their wedding day as a sophisticated affair. He said they had spent a significant amount of money to ensure everything was perfect, and they couldn't make exceptions, not even for family. The condescension in his voice made my blood boil, but I managed to remain composed. I told him that I understood it was their wedding, but I didn't understand how my 15-year-old niece didn't qualify as family on a day that was supposed to be about celebrating family coming together. Richard, clearly annoyed, said that was my perspective and that theirs was different. He said the invitation stood as it was written and that he hoped to see me there. With that, he handed the phone back to Stephanie, who quickly said she had to go and ended the call. I sat there, holding my phone, completely stunned by what had just happened. I wondered how I was going to tell Hannah that her aunt, whom she adored, didn't want her at the wedding. How could I explain that she was being excluded because she wasn't considered sophisticated enough? The thought of the disappointment on her face broke my heart. This wasn't just about missing a party, it was about being rejected by family, being told, "You're not good enough." It was a feeling I was all too familiar with from my own childhood, and I had always sworn Hannah would never experience that kind of pain. After the phone call with Stephanie and Richard, I sat at our kitchen table for nearly an hour, my emotions swirling like a tornado. I was angry at my sister for allowing this to happen, hurt that she would choose her new life over her family, and worried about how this would affect Hannah. Underneath it all was a deep sadness that the sister I had grown up with, the one who had stood by me through my darkest days, seemed to have disappeared. I carefully considered my options. I could attend the wedding alone, leaving Hannah behind and pretending everything was fine. I could try to reason with Stephanie again, perhaps involving our parents to mediate. Or I could take a stand and refuse to attend a celebration that excluded my daughter. The next morning, Hannah bounded into the kitchen, her phone in hand. She mentioned how fancy Aunt Stephanie's wedding was going to be, saying she had been looking at pictures of the hotel online and that the chandeliers were bigger than our living room. My heart sank. I had hoped to have more time to figure out how to break the news, but it was clear that I needed to have this conversation now. I asked her to sit down, explaining that I needed to talk to her about something. Her smile faltered as she sat across from me, asking if something was wrong. Taking a deep breath, I told her that I had called Aunt Stephanie about the wedding invitation and that there was something she needed to know. I tried to explain the situation as gently as possible, without blaming Stephanie or Richard. I told her about the adults-only policy and how, unfortunately, that meant she wouldn't be able to attend. Hannah's face fell, but she quickly tried to mask her disappointment. She said it was okay and that it was their wedding, so they got to decide. I reached across the table to take her hand, asking if she was sure she was okay with it. She nodded, but I could see her eyes beginning to water. She insisted she was totally fine, adding that it would probably be boring anyway, with all those fancy people talking about boring adult things. Then she looked up at me with a question that broke my heart. She wanted to know if her aunt had said why she didn't want her there and if she had done something wrong. I told her firmly that she had done nothing wrong and that it had nothing to do with her. It was about Richard's family and their ideas about what a wedding should be like. I assured her that her Aunt Stephanie loved her very much. Hannah nodded again, but I could tell she didn't believe me. Quietly, she told me that she had already bought a dress, the blue one we had seen at the mall last month. She had saved up her babysitting money and gone back for it, wanting to surprise me. A surge of anger so intense it nearly took my breath away came over me. My daughter had spent her own money on a dress for an event where she wasn't wanted, an event hosted by her own aunt who had once been like a second mother to her. Hannah then asked to be excused to do some homework. I knew it was summer break and she had no homework, but I nodded anyway. She needed space to process her feelings, and I respected that. After Hannah went to her room, I called Stephanie again. This time, she sent me to voicemail twice before finally answering on the third try. She told me she was really busy with wedding plans and asked if this could wait. I told her no, it couldn't. I wanted to let her know that Hannah and I wouldn't be attending her wedding. There was a moment of silence on the other end. She asked what I meant and if this was about the adults-only thing, saying she thought we had settled that. I told her we hadn't settled anything and that she and Richard had made a decision that excluded my daughter, her niece, from a family celebration and that I couldn't support or participate in that. Stephanie's voice rose in pitch. She accused me of punishing her because she wouldn't break the rules for my daughter, adding that this was exactly why they didn't want children at the wedding. It always became a whole drama. I told her that this wasn't about breaking rules. It was about recognizing who was family and who wasn't. Hannah wasn't just some random child. She was her niece, someone she used to bake cookies with every Saturday, someone who looked up to her and loved her. And now she was telling her she wasn't welcome at one of the most important events in her life. Stephanie snapped back, saying that I was making it all about me as usual. She said it was her and Richard's wedding day, and they got to decide how they wanted it to be. If I couldn't respect that, then maybe it was better that I didn't come. I calmly agreed with her, saying that if my daughter wasn't welcome, then neither was I. I wished her a beautiful wedding and ended the call before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt a strange sense of peace. I had made the right decision. The fallout was immediate. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up with messages from family members. My mother called, horrified that I was causing drama before the wedding. She insisted that I needed to be the bigger person and that it was just one day, and Hannah would have plenty of other opportunities to attend family events. I told her that wasn't the point. The point was that Hannah was being excluded from a family celebration for no reason other than Richard's family's arbitrary rules. My father was more direct. He told me to stop being so stubborn and to think about my sister. He asked if I wanted to ruin her wedding because I couldn't leave Hannah with a babysitter for one day. Even extended family members weighed in. My Aunt Helen texted to say I was being selfish. My cousin Michelle suggested I was jealous of Stephanie's happiness. Through it all, I remained firm in my decision. This wasn't about me being stubborn or jealous. This was about teaching my daughter that she deserved respect and that family should not be conditional. That night, as I passed by Hannah's room, I heard muffled crying. I gently knocked on her door, asking if I could come in. Hannah quickly wiped her eyes and nodded. I sat on the edge of her bed and pulled her into a hug. I told her that I knew it hurt and that it was okay to be sad and disappointed. She whispered that she just didn't understand why Aunt Stephanie didn't want her there because they used to be so close. I carefully explained that people change and that sometimes they get caught up in new relationships or lifestyles and forget what matters. But that didn't mean she had done anything wrong. Hannah looked up at me and asked if I was really not going to the wedding because of her. I brushed her hair back from her forehead and told her that I wasn't going because I believed we were a package deal. If someone couldn't accept both of us, then they didn't get either of us. That was what family meant to me. Hannah hugged me tighter. As I held my daughter, I knew I had made the right choice. Sometimes standing up for what you believe in means making difficult decisions, but in this case, the decision was clear. My priority was protecting my daughter's heart and teaching her about self-respect and true family values. The wedding was still weeks away, and I knew the pressure from family would continue, but my mind was made up. Hannah and I would spend that day doing something special together, creating our own memories, while Stephanie created hers without us. The day of Stephanie's wedding arrived with perfect weather. Bright blue skies, not a cloud in sight, and a gentle breeze. It was the kind of day brides dream about. As I looked out our kitchen window that morning, a pang of sadness went through me. Despite everything, a part of me still wished I could be there to see my little sister walk down the aisle. Hannah joined me at the breakfast table and, trying to sound casual, asked what we were doing today. She was clearly making an effort to sound upbeat. I told her I was thinking we could have our own special day and poured her a glass of orange juice. I suggested we start with that new Marvel movie she had been wanting to see, followed by lunch at the Cheesecake Factory, and then a trip to the mall because I thought we both deserved some retail therapy. Hannah's face brightened, and she said it sounded awesome. We spent the morning at the movie theater, losing ourselves in the action and adventure on screen. Hannah seemed genuinely happy, laughing at the funny parts and gripping my hand during the tense scenes. For a few hours, we both forgot about the wedding. After the movie, as we were enjoying our lunch, my phone started buzzing with texts. I tried to ignore it, but they kept coming. Hannah noticed my distraction and asked if it was about the wedding. I nodded quickly, scanning the messages. They were from various family members and friends who were at the ceremony. My cousin Lisa had written that my aunt looked beautiful and had attached a photo of Stephanie in her wedding dress. Stephanie looked stunning, radiant in an ivory gown that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Another message from a friend said that Stephanie kept looking for me and seemed sad that I wasn't there. Then my mother sent a message saying that the ceremony was beautiful, that Richard's family was very impressive, and that it wasn't too late to come to the reception. I put my phone away, determined not to let the messages ruin our day. I told Hannah they were just updates from the wedding, nothing important. My daughter, ever perceptive, told me she knew today was difficult for me too, and that she wasn't a baby. I admitted that she was right, the day was hard, but I was exactly where I wanted to be, with the person who mattered most to me. Hannah smiled, and we finished our lunch, sharing a slice of cheesecake for dessert before heading to the mall. As promised, we indulged in some retail therapy, buying matching mother-daughter bracelets and a new pair of sneakers for Hannah. By the time we got home that evening, my phone was filled with dozens of new messages and several missed calls. The wedding was over and the fallout was beginning. My mother called as soon as we walked through the door, asking how I could do this to my sister. She explained that Stephanie had been looking for me all day and had to make excuses to Richard's family when they asked where I was. I sighed and reminded her that we had already been through this and that Stephanie had made her choice and I had made mine. My mother snapped, calling me childish and saying that I had ruined the most important day of my sister's life because of my pride. I insisted that it wasn't about pride, but about standing up for Hannah and showing her that family doesn't exclude family. Our conversation ended with my mother hanging up on me, something she had never done before. Over the next few days, the division in our family became increasingly apparent. My father, always the peacemaker, tried to remain neutral, but clearly sided with Stephanie in his gentle suggestions that I should have been more understanding. My mother was openly angry, sending me passive-aggressive texts about family loyalty and selfishness. Interestingly, not everyone was against us. My grandmother, usually quiet and non-confrontational, called to tell me she was proud of me. In her soft, wavering voice, she said that Richard had changed my sister and that the Stephanie she knew would never have excluded Hannah. She said I had done the right thing by showing my daughter she came first. A few cousins and friends also reached out with their support, some confessing that they thought the adults-only rule was ridiculous, especially when it came to immediate family. Meanwhile, Stephanie and Richard were enjoying a 2-week honeymoon in Italy. Her social media was filled with pictures of them drinking wine in Tuscany, riding gondolas in Venice, and posing in designer clothes against Mediterranean backdrops. There was no mention of the wedding drama or any acknowledgement that her sister and niece had been absent from her big day. Friends who attended the wedding told me it had been extravagant beyond belief. Ice sculptures, a 10-piece band, a 5-course meal, and champagne that flowed like water. Richard's family, who had old money from the East Coast, had spared no expense in showcasing their wealth and status. One friend, Lisa, told me over coffee that while it was beautiful, it honestly didn't feel like Stephanie. It felt like a show for Richard's family and business associates. She mentioned that half the guests were people she had never seen before, older couples in expensive clothes who barely smiled. Another friend mentioned that she had overheard Richard's mother commenting on Stephanie's family, reporting uncomfortably that she had called my parents quaint and seemed surprised that Stephanie had turned out so well given her background. These reports only confirmed what I had already suspected. Stephanie was being absorbed into Richard's world, a world where image and status mattered more than genuine connections. It was a world where a 15-year-old niece could be excluded from a wedding because she didn't fit the sophisticated image they wanted to project. As the weeks passed, the tension in our family remained. Sunday dinners at my parents' house, once a regular tradition, became awkward affairs that I often found excuses to miss. My mother would constantly talk about Stephanie and Richard, updating everyone on their fabulous new life, while giving me pointed looks. For her part, Hannah seemed to bounce back from the hurt more quickly than I did. Teenagers have a remarkable resilience, and she was soon caught up in summer activities and friends. But occasionally, I would notice her scrolling through old photos of her and Stephanie on her phone, a wistful expression on her face. 2 months after the wedding, Stephanie and Richard moved into a new house in an exclusive neighborhood across town. I learned about it not from my sister, but from my mother, who couldn't stop talking about the 5-bedroom, 6-bathroom mansion with a pool and home theater. My mother informed me during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations that they were having a housewarming party next month. It was very exclusive, with only 50 people, but Stephanie had said that I was invited. I asked if Hannah would be welcome at this event, already knowing the answer. My mother's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. She said it was an evening cocktail party, very sophisticated and not really appropriate for someone Hannah's age. I thanked her and said that we would have to decline. And so the pattern was established, a new normal. Stephanie in her wealthy bubble with Richard, Hannah and I in our modest but happy home, and a growing chasm between our two worlds. Family gatherings became diplomatic negotiations with everyone walking on eggshells. As fall turned into winter and the holiday season approached, I wondered how we would navigate the traditional family Christmas celebration. Would this be the first year Hannah and I spent Christmas alone, or would the spirit of the season finally bring some healing to our fractured family? The Johnson family Christmas had always been a big deal in our household. For as long as I could remember, the entire extended family gathered at my parents' house on Christmas Eve for a traditional dinner, gift exchange, and a celebration that often lasted well into the night. My mother would spend weeks preparing, decorating every inch of the house with garlands, nutcrackers, and the family heirloom ornaments that had been passed down for generations. My father would string thousands of lights outside, determined each year to outdo the neighbors. And Hannah and I had always been in charge of the Christmas tree, carefully arranging ornaments and reminiscing about the stories behind each one. As December approached, I wondered if this year would be different. Would Stephanie and Richard even attend a family gathering that might not meet their new standards of sophistication? And if they did come, would Hannah once again be made to feel unwelcome? My questions were answered on the first Sunday of December when my mother called. Her voice was tentative, lacking its usual confidence, as she announced that she and my father were planning Christmas Eve as usual this year and that they really hoped Hannah and I would come. I asked directly if Stephanie and Richard would be there. She admitted that they had confirmed they would attend and then pleaded with me to make an effort this time, saying it was Christmas and that we needed to put the wedding business aside and just be a family again. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of family expectations pressing down on me. I told her that I had no problem being civil to Stephanie and Richard, but that I needed to know that Hannah would be treated with respect. I was not going to put her through another rejection. My mother insisted that of course she would be treated with respect, because it was Christmas and everyone was welcome at Christmas. I pressed for a different answer, saying I needed to know that Stephanie and Richard acknowledged they had hurt Hannah and that they would make an effort to make amends. My mother sighed heavily, saying that I was asking for too much. She said that Stephanie didn't feel she had done anything wrong regarding the wedding. It was their special day, and they had the right to plan it as they wished. I countered that I also had the right to protect my daughter. My mother's frustration was evident in her voice as she said that no one was asking me not to protect Hannah, but that carrying this grudge wasn't healthy for anyone, especially not for her. She asked if I wanted her to grow up thinking that family relationships could be discarded over one disagreement. She had a point, and I was reluctant to admit it. Was I using Hannah as an excuse to avoid dealing with my own hurt feelings about Stephanie's changes? Was I making things worse by keeping Hannah away from family gatherings? I finally said that I would think about it, but that I needed to talk to Hannah first, because this had to be her decision too. After hanging up, I found Hannah in her room, textbooks spread across her bed as she worked on a science project. I sat on the edge of her bed and asked if we could talk for a minute. She looked up from her work and said, "Sure, what's up?" I told her that Grandma had called about Christmas Eve and that they were having the usual family gathering at their house, and that Aunt Stephanie and Richard would be there. Hannah's expression was unreadable as she asked if we were going. I told her that was what I wanted to talk to her about and that I thought it should be her decision. If she wasn't comfortable going, we could start our own Christmas tradition this year, maybe go skiing for the weekend or take a trip to visit Aunt Judy in California. Hannah was quiet for a moment, considering the options. She asked if Aunt Stephanie would even want her there after the whole wedding thing. I replied carefully that Grandma said everyone was welcome, but that I would understand if she was hesitant. Hannah said that she didn't want to cause drama, but she also didn't want to miss Christmas with Grandma and Grandpa. She then confessed that she missed Aunt Stephanie, even though she had been weird lately. My heart ached at her words. Despite everything, Hannah still loved her aunt and wanted that relationship back. I suggested that we go, but have a backup plan, saying that if things got uncomfortable, we could leave early and catch a late movie or something. Hannah nodded slowly and said she thought she wanted to go, but asked if we could practice what to say if Richard was mean again. I absolutely agreed. We would come up with some polite but firm responses, and I reminded her that we were a team and that if at any point she wanted to leave, all she had to do was give me the signal and we would be out of there. Over the next few weeks, as Christmas approached, I found myself increasingly anxious about the upcoming family gathering. My father called twice to remind me to keep the peace and think of the family. My mother sent detailed texts about the menu, seating arrangements, and gift exchange, as if focusing on logistics could somehow erase the underlying tension. Meanwhile, I was formulating a plan of my own. If we were going to attend this Christmas celebration, I wanted it to be meaningful. I wanted to make a statement not with confrontation or anger, but with something more powerful, something that might finally break through the wall Stephanie had built around herself. I spent evenings after Hannah went to bed working on a special project, gathering materials and memories from years past. It was therapeutic in a way, revisiting happier times and remembering the sister Stephanie used to be. As Christmas Eve approached, Hannah and I went shopping for gifts for the family. For my parents, we chose a digital photo frame preloaded with family photos. For various aunts, uncles, and cousins, we selected thoughtful but simple presents. But for Stephanie and Richard, I had something different in mind. Hannah wondered what you get for people who can buy themselves anything they want. I replied that sometimes the most valuable gifts aren't things that can be bought, but reminders of what truly matters. The night before Christmas Eve, as we wrapped presents, Hannah asked me a question that caught me off guard. She wondered if I thought Aunt Stephanie was happy with Richard and her new life. I paused, considering how to answer honestly without disparaging my sister. I said that I thought Stephanie was living the life she thought she wanted right now, and that sometimes people get caught up in appearances and forget to check if they are actually happy with what's underneath. Hannah offered a comparison, saying it was like when she wanted those expensive jeans because all the popular girls had them, but then she never wore them because they were uncomfortable. I smiled at her insight, agreeing that it was exactly like that. Sometimes we think we want something because of how it looks from the outside, not realizing it might not feel right when we actually have it. Hannah nodded thoughtfully and said she hoped Stephanie would figure it out. She missed the old Aunt Stephanie. I softly agreed, saying that I did too. That night, I finished wrapping Stephanie and Richard's gift, tying it with a beautiful red ribbon. It wasn't expensive or impressive by their standards. It wouldn't match their luxurious lifestyle or fit into their sophisticated image, but it contained something more valuable than anything money could buy: truth and memories. As I placed it under our small Christmas tree, I wondered how it would be received. Would Stephanie see it as the olive branch it was intended to be? Or would she dismiss it as sentimental nonsense that had no place in her new life? Either way, I was ready to face Christmas Eve with my head held high and my daughter by my side. Whatever happened, we would face it together, with dignity and grace. And maybe, just maybe, a Christmas miracle would bring back the sister I had lost. Christmas Eve arrived with a light dusting of snow, just enough to make everything look magical without causing driving hazards. Hannah and I spent the morning baking cookies to bring to dinner, following my grandmother's recipe for gingerbread that had been a family tradition for generations. Hannah nervously asked if she looked okay, wearing a green velvet dress with a delicate gold necklace I had given her for her last birthday. I assured her that she looked beautiful, adjusting a strand of her hair and reminding her to hold her head high because she had nothing to be ashamed of. We arrived at my parents' house at exactly 6 p.m., our arms laden with gifts and cookies. The house looked like something out of a Christmas movie, with twinkling lights outlining every window and door, and a large wreath adorning the front entrance. My mother greeted us with forced cheerfulness, welcoming us in and saying that everyone was already here. My stomach tightened at those words, knowing that everyone included Stephanie and Richard. As we entered the living room, I immediately spotted them by the fireplace. Stephanie was in a designer red dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and Richard was in a tailored suit that seemed excessive for a family gathering. They were chatting with my father and Richard's parents, who had apparently been invited this year. Hannah gripped my hand tighter as we approached the group, and I squeezed back reassuringly. I offered a pleasant and neutral Merry Christmas to everyone. Richard's parents nodded stiffly, clearly sizing us up and finding us lacking. My father gave us each a warm hug. Richard offered a curt Merry Christmas without quite making eye contact. Stephanie hesitated for a moment before stepping forward to hug me briefly. She said she was glad we could make it, but her voice didn't quite match her words. Then she turned to Hannah with an awkward smile, saying that she had grown since she last saw her. Hannah politely replied, "Hey, Stephanie. Merry Christmas." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group until my mother announced that dinner was ready. We moved to the dining room where the table had been extended to accommodate all 15 guests. I immediately noticed that Hannah and I had been seated at the opposite end of the table from Stephanie and Richard, with Richard's parents given the places of honor near my parents. The message was clear. The new social hierarchy in our family had Stephanie and her in-laws at the top, with Hannah and me at the bottom. Dinner was a tense affair, with conversation awkwardly flowing around sensitive topics. My mother fawned over Richard's mother, complimenting everything from her jewelry to her charity work. My father talked business with Richard and his father, nodding and impressed at every mention of million-dollar deals and exclusive golf clubs. Halfway through the meal, Richard cleared his throat and raised his glass. He announced that he would like to propose a toast to new family traditions and exciting news. Everyone raised their glasses expectantly. He proudly declared that he and Stephanie had been accepted as members at the Hillcrest Country Club and, more importantly, had just put a deposit down on a vacation home in Aspen. He said he hoped to host many family gatherings there in the future. Murmurs of congratulations circulated around the table. My mother looked ecstatic, already imagining herself telling her friends about her daughter's vacation home. Richard then added, with a brief glance in my direction, that the Aspen house would mainly be for adult gatherings and that the neighborhood and their social circle there weren't really suitable for children. I felt Hannah stiffen beside me. Once again, she was being preemptively excluded. I placed my hand over hers under the table, silently communicating my support. My mother gushed about how wonderful that was, either missing or ignoring the slight. Stephanie then interjected, looking uncomfortable for the first time that evening, that she was thinking they could host Easter there next year for everyone. She glanced at Hannah briefly before looking away. Richard replied dismissively, saying they would see and that it depended on their schedule and the renovations. The conversation moved on to Richard's recent business success and his parents' upcoming cruise. Hannah remained quiet throughout the meal, pushing food around her plate more than eating it. I could see she was trying hard to maintain her composure in a situation where she clearly felt unwelcome. After dinner, we moved back to the living room for the gift exchange. This had always been my favorite part of Christmas Eve when I was growing up. Everyone would sit in a circle and we would take turns opening presents, each gift met with genuine excitement and gratitude, no matter how small or inexpensive. Tonight, however, the gift exchange felt more like a competition. Richard's parents presented Stephanie and Richard with a small envelope that, based on Stephanie's reaction, contained something extremely valuable. Richard gave Stephanie a diamond bracelet that elicited gasps from my mother. My parents gave them a crystal vase that my mother repeatedly mentioned was from that exclusive shop downtown. When it was time for Hannah and me to open our gifts, they were nice, but clearly less expensive. Richard's parents had given us each a generic scarf with the price tag still attached, showing they had spent exactly $50 each, probably the minimum they considered acceptable. Stephanie and Richard's gift to us was a gift card to a department store, again, nice but impersonal. Throughout it all, Hannah maintained her grace, thanking everyone sincerely for their gifts, even those who had clearly put little thought into them. Finally, it was time for our gifts to be opened. My parents were genuinely touched by the digital photo frame, especially when they saw we had loaded it with family photos going back decades. Then it was Stephanie and Richard's turn to open our gift. I handed Stephanie the carefully wrapped package, our eyes meeting briefly as she took it. "It's not much," I said quietly, "but I hope it means something to you." Stephanie unwrapped the gift, slowly revealing a handcrafted photo album bound in soft leather. The cover read, "Family Memories," in simple gold lettering. "Open it," I encouraged as she looked at me questioningly. As Stephanie opened the album, her expression changed from polite interest to surprise. The first page contained a photo of her as a newborn with me at 5 years old, holding her carefully in my arms, looking down at her with pure adoration. The next pages chronicled our childhood together, Stephanie's first steps with me holding her hands, the two of us in matching Easter dresses, me helping her ride a bike without training wheels, us building sandcastles at the beach. Then came the photos of Stephanie with Hannah as a baby. Stephanie cradling her newborn niece in the hospital. Stephanie feeding Hannah a bottle while making silly faces at her. The two of them baking cookies, flour covering their faces. Hannah's first day of school with Stephanie kneeling beside her straightening her backpack. Interspersed among the photos were handmade cards and drawings that Hannah had given to her aunt over the years, birthday cards with wobbly handwriting, Mother's Day cards that Hannah had made for Stephanie because "you are like a second mom to me," and a drawing of the three of us holding hands with "my family" written across the top in a child's script. As Stephanie turned the pages, her hands began to tremble slightly. Richard looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and checking his watch. His parents exchanged disapproving glances, clearly finding the emotional display distasteful. The final page of the album held the wedding invitation that had started everything, mounted carefully in the center. Underneath it, in simple handwriting, I had written, "Family means no one gets left behind or forgotten." The room had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching Stephanie, waiting for her reaction. She stared at the last page for what seemed like an eternity, her finger tracing the words I had written. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "Amanda," she began, but her voice caught. Richard cleared his throat loudly. "Well, that's certainly sentimental," he said, his tone making it clear he did not consider that a compliment. "Stephanie, perhaps we should get going soon. We have that brunch tomorrow with the Hendersons." But Stephanie wasn't listening to him. She was looking at Hannah now, who was watching her aunt with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Hannah," Stephanie said softly, "do you want to come see the rest of the pictures? There are some here I had forgotten about." Hannah hesitated, looking at me for guidance. I nodded encouragingly, and she moved to sit beside her aunt on the couch. As they looked through the album together, Stephanie began sharing stories about the photos. "This was the time we tried to make a cake for your mom's birthday and ended up with batter all over the kitchen, remember? And this was your first ballet recital. You were so nervous, but you did perfectly." Hannah smiled, genuine happiness lighting up her face for the first time that evening. "I remember. You brought me those pink roses afterward and told me I was the best dancer there, even though I totally messed up the spin part." For a moment, it was like the old Stephanie had returned. The one who valued family above all else. The one who saw Hannah as a precious part of her life, not an inconvenience to be excluded. Richard watched this interaction with growing impatience. "Stephanie," he said sharply, "it's getting late." Stephanie looked up at him, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen before, resistance. "Just a few more minutes, Richard. I haven't seen these photos in years." Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. His parents, however, made a show of checking their watches and gathering their coats, clearly disapproving of the turn the evening had taken. As the night wound down, Stephanie pulled me aside. "Can we talk privately?" We stepped into my father's study, closing the door behind us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "The album," Stephanie finally said, "it's beautiful." "Thank you." "You're welcome," I replied. "I wanted to remind you of who we used to be, who we still can be." Stephanie's eyes filled with tears again. "I know I've been different since meeting Richard. His world is so demanding. There are expectations I never had to deal with before. But at what cost, Steph? I asked gently. You excluded your own niece from your wedding. A niece you used to love like your own daughter. Is fitting into Richard's world worth losing who you really are? She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Richard's family is very traditional. They have certain ideas about how things should be done. And Richard, he can be difficult when he doesn't get his way. I felt a chill at her words. Stephanie, are you happy? Truly happy? She didn't answer immediately, which was an answer in itself. I have everything I thought I wanted, she finally said. The beautiful house, the successful husband, the social status. But when I saw those pictures tonight, her voice trailed off. It's not too late, I told her. Hannah still loves you. She misses her aunt, the one who used to bake cookies with her and take her shopping and tell her she could be anything she wanted to be. Stephanie wiped away a tear. I've made such a mess of things. I don't know how to fix it. Start by being the Stephanie in those photos again, I suggested, the one who knew that family means everyone, not just the convenient or socially acceptable parts. She nodded slowly. I'll try. I promise I'll try. As we rejoined the others, I noticed Richard watching us suspiciously. He knew something had shifted, though he couldn't quite identify what it was. When it was time to leave, Stephanie hugged Hannah tightly. I've missed you, she whispered loud enough that I could hear. Can we have lunch next week, just the two of us, like we used to? Hannah's face lit up. Really? I would love that. Richard frowned, but said nothing. His parents had already left, citing the late hour and the long drive back to their hotel. As Hannah and I drove home that night, the car was filled with a sense of cautious hope. Do you think Aunt Stephanie meant it? Hannah asked, about lunch and everything. I think she did, I replied. The album reminded her of who she used to be. Sometimes people just need a gentle nudge to find their way back to themselves. That was a pretty awesome Christmas present, Mom, Hannah said, smiling. Way better than a gift card. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones that remind us of what really matters. That night, as I tucked Hannah into bed, something I rarely did now that she was 15, she looked up at me with serious eyes. Thank you for standing up for me, Mom. With the wedding and everything, I know it was hard for you to say no to Aunt Stephanie. I kissed her forehead. You will always come first for me, Hannah. Always. That's what being a parent means. As I closed her door, I reflected on the evening. My small change to our usual Christmas gifts, the simple act of reminding Stephanie of our shared history and the bonds that had once been unbreakable, had created a crack in the wall she had built around herself. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Not yet. But it was a start. And sometimes that is all you need. A beginning, a chance to rebuild what has been broken, a reminder of what truly matters in life. The days following Christmas brought a flurry of unexpected developments. The morning after our family gathering, I received a text from Stephanie that simply read, "Can we meet for coffee tomorrow?" Just us. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes, neutral territory for what I suspected would be a difficult conversation. Stephanie arrived looking different than she had at Christmas. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup. Instead, she wore jeans, a simple sweater, and minimal makeup. She looked more like the sister I remembered. Thank you for meeting me, she said as she slid into the booth across from me. The album really affected you, didn't it? I asked. She nodded, turning her coffee cup in her hands. It wasn't just the photos, though they were powerful. It was seeing Hannah's face when I suggested lunch. The pure joy at the thought of spending time with me again. I realized how much I've been missing, how much I've thrown away trying to fit into Richard's world. It's not too late to fix things, I said cautiously. That's what I want to talk to you about, Stephanie replied. After we left your parents' house, Richard and I had a huge fight. He was furious about the album. Said it was emotional manipulation. He called it low class to bring up the past that way. I felt a surge of anger. There is nothing low class about family memories. I know that now, Stephanie said quietly. But for months I've been letting Richard dictate what's appropriate, what's sophisticated, who I should spend time with. I've been so afraid of disappointing him or embarrassing him in front of his family that I lost sight of who I really am. What happened after the fight? I asked. I spent the night in our guest room, she admitted. This morning, I told Richard the First was going to have lunch with Hannah next week, with or without his approval. I told him I would not cut my family out of my life anymore, especially not Hannah. How did he take it? Not well, she said with a humorless laugh. He said I needed to decide what was more important, my new life with him or my old life with my unsophisticated family. And what did you say? I held my breath, not sure I wanted to hear the answer. I told him I should never have had to choose in the first place. A man who truly loved me would not ask me to cut out people who have been there for me my entire life. She took a deep breath. I told him I needed time to think about our relationship. I'm staying at a hotel for a few days. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That took courage, Steph. It shouldn't have taken courage to stand up for my family, she said, tears filling her eyes. That's what makes me realize how far I've strayed from who I really am. The Stephanie in those photos would never have excluded Hannah from her wedding. She would never have let anyone make her choose between the people she loves. People make mistakes, I said gently, especially when they're trying to fit into a new world. The important thing is that you're recognizing it now. I owe Hannah an apology, Stephanie said firmly. A real one, not just a casual lunch invitation. And I owe you one too. You were right to stand up to me about the wedding. I was wrong, and I'm so sorry I put you in that position. We talked for over 2 hours that day. Really talked in a way we hadn't since before Stephanie met Richard. She confessed that she had been unhappy for months, feeling increasingly isolated from her old friends and family, constantly walking on eggshells around Richard and his parents, never quite measuring up to their expectations despite her best efforts. The irony, she said, is that I thought marrying Richard would give me security and status. Instead, I've never felt more insecure or less like myself. The following week, true to her words, Stephanie took Hannah to lunch. They went to their old favorite spot, a casual diner where they had spent countless Saturdays before Stephanie met Richard. When Hannah came home, she was beaming. Stephanie said she made a huge mistake about the wedding, Hannah told me excitedly. She apologized like 1,000,000 times and said she should have stood up to Richard. And guess what? She's taking me shopping next weekend, just like we used to do. Over the next few months, I watched as Stephanie gradually reclaimed pieces of her old self. She and Richard entered counseling, trying to find a way forward that respected both their relationship and Stephanie's family ties. It wasn't always smooth. Richard resisted at first, accusing Stephanie of regressing, of embarrassing him in front of his family by suddenly insisting on including Hannah in events. But Stephanie stood firm. For the first time since meeting Richard, she established boundaries and stuck to them. Hannah is my niece, my family, she told him. She will be included in our lives. That's non-negotiable. To everyone's surprise, Richard eventually began to adapt. Perhaps he realized how close he had come to losing Stephanie. Perhaps the counseling helped him see beyond his rigid upbringing. Whatever the reason, he made efforts to get to know Hannah, even inviting her to help design a recreation room in their new house for when you visit. By spring, the family dynamics had shifted significantly. Sunday dinners resumed, now alternating between my parents' house and Stephanie and Richard's. Hannah was always included, always welcomed. Richard's parents remained stiff and formal, but they no longer openly excluded Hannah or made pointed comments about children at adult events. At Easter, Stephanie and Richard did indeed host the family at their Aspen house, as Stephanie had suggested at Christmas. Hannah was given her own room decorated specifically for her, with photos of her and Stephanie on the dresser. It was a clear message. This space was hers. She belonged here. One evening during that Easter weekend, as Hannah and Richard's father were engaged in an unexpected but lively chess match, Stephanie and I stepped onto the balcony to admire the mountain view. "Thank you," she said, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For showing me what I was about to lose." She turned to look at me. That album was the wake-up call I needed. It showed me who I used to be and who I was becoming. I didn't like the comparison. "That's what family does," I replied. "Holds up a mirror when we need it most." I almost lost everything that really matters, Stephanie said quietly, trying to gain things that don't. As we stood there watching the sun set behind the mountains, I reflected on everything that had happened since that wedding invitation arrived last June. The hurt, the anger, the broken relationships, and now the healing. I had made a difficult choice to stand up for what I believed was right, to show my daughter that she deserved respect and inclusion, especially from family. It had been painful and lonely at times, but standing firm in that conviction had ultimately led to something better than mere reconciliation. It had led to growth and understanding for all of us. Stephanie had learned that true happiness comes not from social status or material possessions, but from authentic connections with the people who love you for who you really are. Hannah had learned that sometimes standing up for yourself means facing rejection and disappointment, but that self-respect is worth the temporary pain. And I had learned that sometimes the most powerful way to change a situation is not through angry confrontation, but through a gentle reminder of what truly matters. As we rejoined the others inside, I watched Hannah laugh at something Richard said, saw the genuine smile on Stephanie's face as she observed them getting along, and felt a sense of peace settle over me. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Sometimes standing your ground is the greatest gift you can give not just to yourself, but to everyone involved. And sometimes a simple photo album can bridge the gap between who we have become and who we truly are. In the end, family is not about perfect harmony or always agreeing. It is about loving each other through the disagreements, standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult, and finding your way back to each other when you have lost your way.